Hello, and here we go with our first major lecture in COM 485. You'll notice that I put into Canvas an outline. I have it titled Notes that I would like for you to print out, probably is the best, so that you're actually handwriting, taking notes. I would use that strategy as opposed to typing, because research does show that you learn best by taking in the information and actually writing it out. So that's my advice to you. If you take it or not, that's up to you. So here we go. As I talked to you last time when I was introducing myself, I tried to make it clear that I've done quite a bit of research and not just writing articles, but also working in research firms and organizations. So I'm part of something that's called ResearchGate, which sounds really much more exciting than it is. It's basically an online site that you can put your PDFs of your research there. Other people can read them. They can use them for free. And it's a bunch of egghead academics, basically, who take a look at what other people have done. So this is the kind of thing that I get fairly often. You've probably heard of getting badges, those electronic little strokes to your ego if you've accomplished something. Well, this is the badge that I was given because of the fact that one article that I am co-author of was read 100 times on this website. So you might be saying, big deal. I kind of am saying that myself. But the other question as a researcher that comes to my mind is, so how do you know if people actually read it? What that really means is people have accessed it. Now they could have, opened it and then downloaded it for themselves. They could have opened it and said, Kate Sobiech doesn't know what she's talking about, and immediately went on to other articles. I mean, who knows? Or they didn't even read it at all. That's the kind of thing that in the scientific method that we're going to start talking about are questions that come to my mind. So I hope as we keep going, those are the kinds of things that'll come to your mind as well. Here's something I took out of the Marquette University's student newspaper called the Tribune. Now the data is not new, but it doesn't really matter as much as what is it that we're really looking at here. This is an infographic. We like to use infographics more and more these days rather than actually explaining anything in text. So what I'd like you to do, and I'll instruct you on this now and then, is to pause this for a moment. You can hit escape to do that, and that'll take you out of the audio. If you pause it for a moment, and I'd said have a piece of scrap paper, something handy, come up with, before I go on, some reasons why there was this rise in applications as far as you can tell. So if you come back with some reasons in hand, I wonder what you might think. So it looks clearly like between 2000 to 2002, there wasn't much of a difference. And between 2004 and 2006, there wasn't a whole lot of difference either, though there's a jump between 2002 and 2004 for applications to Marquette University. We don't know for sure, is this a statistically significant difference between 2002 and 2004? Is there a difference between 2000 and 2002? Significantly, if we would run some kind of a test of statistical significance? Well, I can tell you, based on what I know about tests like that, the answer is no. Between 2000 rather and 2002, as well as between 2004 and 2006. But the significant difference is between 2002 and 2004. And what's that difference? Well, what happened? What did you come up with as possible reasons that there would be a rise in number of applications? Now you might say, okay, one reason could be they lowered the application fee. Possible. So when that happened, we saw a rise in applications that would be, naturally following. You might say maybe they lowered the ACT standards and that word got out, what score you needed to get approved. Maybe there's something related to tuition. Maybe was it lowered, frozen, more scholarships available? Those are possible reasons that if we could go back during that time frame and investigate and say, those might be some significant variables that relate to the increase in applications. Now, the truth is that the reason for the rise in applications, in all likelihood, was that Marquette was in the NCAA Final Four leading up to this rise in applications. And when your school's a winner, you attract more people. So that's probably the actual explanation. And then that carried over as far as number of applications in the following years. Now it's a little strange they only put the even years, and there might be some reasons for that, that if you think about it for a second, and again I'd pause here, if you think about it and then come back with some reasons. So if you're coming back now, I think I would say something like this, and without having the data in front of me, I would say there probably wasn't such a dramatic difference if you threw in 2003, for example. There might have been between 2000 and then 2001, it might actually have gone down, and that would make this infographic look messy. Same thing between 2004 to 2005. What happened there? Again, there could have been a greater increase than shows in 2006, or it could have gone down. My suspicion is that there's a reason behind why they put only certain years into this infographic, which again relates to there being lies and damn lies, and then there's statistics. So as one who's trained in the scientific method, I look at a graph like that and ask myself these questions like I had gone over with you. Because it seems like there's some explanation, and as a scientist, I'm trying to uncover what happened for this phenomena of an increase in applications. Oh, I didn't mention that one before. Maybe they suddenly put in a lot of recruitment efforts somewhere with international students and were able to get a lot more applications that way. One of the things I didn't mention was the unfortunate Dahmer effect. You've probably heard of Jeffrey Dahmer. He did his deeds very close to Marquette University, a stone's throw, you might say. And when that all happened, there was a dramatic decline in enrollment at Marquette. I guess moms and dads didn't want to send their little darlings to Dahmerville, even though he was already behind bars by that point. And also, it's not the safest area where Marquette University is housed in downtown Milwaukee. So when you walk a ways away from it, you can run into, I guess, creepy folks like Dahmer or just become potentially part of an unsafe situation. But that's all an aside. And now we're going to start talking about how we usually or commonly know what we know. How do we navigate the world? Most of us are not scientists, and a lot of times I don't have my scientific hat on when I'm just, kind of making my way through a given day, week, or month. So, what are some ways of knowing? Well, you might have heard of having an inkling or you have an intuition. You just have a feeling about something. In fact, people may have told you, if you have that gut feeling, you should just go with it. Now, I'm not here to say one way or another with that, but I've certainly operated on intuition myself, but it's not the scientific method. Have I been wrong with a hunch? Well, of course, as I'm sure you have as well. Experience. Some say experience is the best teacher. Another word for that is tenacity. I know what is going to happen or what I should do in a given situation based upon what I've learned from my past. So if I am trying to make a decision on, I don't know, just something simple like, oh, what brand of cereal to buy. And I'm looking at these many choices. I think, well, Kellogg's has always been good to me. So I'm going to go with that brand in the future because based on my experience, I'm going to like it even if it costs more. That's tenacity. And there's also looking to significant others for what to do. I bet a lot of you do this when you're signing up for courses. Maybe you look at a website like Rate My Professor, which I really wouldn't recommend because of the types of information that's posted there. Or maybe you ask your roommate or other friends, people that you know who've already had a particular course, and you ask who have they had, and try to get the lowdown on that. And I guess the lowdown would be, do they make you read? Do you have to write papers, etc.? And depending on the answers to that, that might give you your answer as far as if you want to take that particular instructor or professor. And that's based upon authority. I'm sure you've heard the expression about taking an educated guess in order to make a decision. So in that case, it's based upon, I know this to be true, I know something else to be true, and so I'm saying that I believe I should go in a certain direction because I believe based upon these other pieces of information that I can best predict, really is what you're saying, I can best predict which way to go. That's an educated guess. Also not the scientific method. Now you've probably also heard of common sense or hearing people say that someone doesn't have common sense. In fact, people who are highly educated, they might say they're book smart, but not people smart. If you've ever heard of that. I have some personal examples of that in my life. But common sense types of knowledge are things supposedly everybody knows that dot 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 dot. So if you are looking at trying to understand and navigate the world through any of these types of ways of knowing, this is the layperson scientific method. And so here we are now going to talk about what is it? What's the scientific method? Well, the scientific method doesn't have a single answer that stands for all time. And that's what we mean by self-correcting. We don't just accept, lay our belief on one answer. So as we'll talk about in the scientific method, people are going to do additional studies. They're going to look to see, are they finding the same quote unquote answer as whoever published a given research article. So no, there isn't a single truth because our scientific method process, part and parcel of it, is to publish what you have found and present it at various conferences. It's held up for people to read, to criticize, and or to ask questions about. That's what's meant by scrutiny. The scientific method is meant to be objective, meaning you aren't going to try to sway one way or another. You're going to ask research questions, as we'll talk about. You're going to gather the data and see what happens in an objective fashion. You're not trying to cook the books and make something appear that doesn't necessarily follow by the scientific method. Now, it's also true no one is 100% objective. You know, we all have rationale and reasons why we study things, why we're interested in particular topics. But the process itself is meant to mitigate or lower the personal subjectivity that we usually use when we're viewing the world. And it's measurable, which is empirical. We can gather information. We gather data in the scientific method. One important term to take note of here is called operational definition. And that is, what is it you really are trying to study? So I use the example here about the word violence. If you looked up violence or violent behavior in children, you're going to get many, many, many thousands of hits, let's say using EBSCO like Academic Search Premier. But if you start reading the articles, you're going to find that different authors or researchers are calling different things by the same name, that is violence. So violence can be, if you think about it, physical acts of violence, verbal acts of violence, threatening motions can be violence. What is it that a given researcher means? That's the operational definition, and that's an important concept for us this semester. So what else is in the scientific method? That you follow a process. That's what I mean by being systematic. What comes first? What does that build from? And so on. You're going to use a theory, meaning that you're going to take someone's, let's say for the area of violence, there's something called aggression theory. There's another called social cognitive theory. You would take a theory and its components and you would test relationships. So again, in the scientific method, there's no single answer, and that's what I mean here by cumulative. There's going to be multiple studies combined together toward building the knowledge in the field. In the scientific method, you ask questions, and then as part of the process, typically, you make predictions about what you believe will happen when you do your study. We are trying to be in a deterministic state in our field of social science where we can figure out which variables go together and in what order. And we're going to talk more about this in short order. Now, there's a difference between something causing something else and something being related to something else. Most of the time in social science, we are talking about correlations, meaning that some type of attitude, belief, or behavior correlates or relates to or is associated with another attitude, belief, or behavior. So, keeping with violence, for whatever reason, I'm interested in that. Maybe there's an association you would find and predict this between the number of hours a middle school boy plays violent video games and the behavioral intent of that same child to behave in an aggressive manner with siblings. That's a correlation. We're not saying the video game playing causes the young boy to smack around his siblings, but there's an association. We might predict that, and that's what that type of field where they do a lot of that type of research would go. And then we can talk about, is it qualitative versus quantitative research? Well, the scientific method tends to be quantitative and also deductive. Now, you might have heard of deductive versus inductive reasoning. I'll start with deductive. That means you're going from a general to a specific. So think about it as the theory is the general, and you're going to go from theory to making specific questions and hypotheses based off the theory. That's the quantitative style. In the qualitative style, the inductive, you're going from specifics to general, meaning you're going to look at the world, and we'll talk about qualitative research later in the semester. You're going to look at something of interest in the world and gather a bunch of data, after which you're then going to create theory out of that. So what do we do typically in coming up with a study? Well, we're looking around at something of interest to us. Often researchers are going to only look at some particular area for their whole research life. I'm not really that type, probably because I've worked at multiple places and because of that have had to kind of pony up with, match what the place I'm working is interested in studying. So when I was at the Center for AIDS Intervention Research, obviously that's topics related to that were part of my research. I've done many other kinds of topics in the health communication area, and I'll be sharing those throughout the semester as well. But given I'm interested in studying some area, like right now, I'm going to be looking at food pantries, like our campus food pantry in particular. And I'm thinking there are other things that could be provided if we have the resources, and anecdotal evidence, meaning people who have left some comments at the pantry, and it's just in a notebook that we have there, have said, it'd be nice if you provided X or Y or Z, some other kinds of even non-food items. So the problem is that, given our resources, what can we do to best meet the needs of students? The next step is the literature review. So I'm going to look at what's been already published about college, university types of food pantries, as well as other community food pantries, and what are the types and what is the success and so on of those types of pantries. Based upon that, I'm going to create the RQ, which means a research question, and I'll generate some hypotheses or predictions based upon what my study is about. The questions that you ask pretty much determine the method, and remember that's what this course says, research methods. So depending on the question, it might call for an experimental study. It might call for doing a survey. It might instead call for doing interviews or as for individuals or focus groups or any number of other things like content analyses. So the question really determines the method, as we'll come back to. And then you go to collect the data, analyze the data, and not only just like run statistical tests in the analysis phase, but then figure out, so what does this all mean based upon what my question or questions were and what hypothesis or hypotheses I had to start with, and present it. Usually what happens is you present it at a conference, and then from there you are trying to get it published in a peer-reviewed journal. There's always, in the process of doing research, kind of the fun part to me as far as writing up the research is, so what was wrong with my study? That's what limitations are. What couldn't I do given the depth and breadth of my study? And what do I suggest other people do? They'll usually have a little subsection called suggestions for future research, which basically is, I'm not doing it, but here's what I think other people should do. And again, that's kind of the creative part of things in writing up research that I have. If you want to call it a good time, that's where I have the most fun in putting together an article. So as brand new researchers and also getting trained in the scientific method, here's what we got to do first. Ask a research question. Based upon the question, we figure out how are we going to go about doing a research study? What kind of methodology are we going to use? So to be honest, for us this semester in our group where we are going to gather data, we're going to do a survey method because we can get that done in the time frame that we have open to us. There are certainly other possibilities, but they're probably not feasible for us. So that's why I tend to explain other methods, but have you actually test out, try out the survey method. And I just have a few examples here of folks who don't really follow this process because they only really like doing one type of method. So Del Zillman is a scholar who is huge in the aggression area with media, and he only runs experiments. That's what he does. Therefore, any question that he asks is going to ensure that how to get at the answer to that question, he has to do an experiment. Mike Allen, he's my mentor at UW-Milwaukee, and he does meta-analyses. Now that's something we'll talk about right at the end of the semester, and it's something as far as a technique that I did as my dissertation. That was the method I used. But the reason to do that type of a method is by the type of question you ask. So Mike Allen is only going to ask questions that will require the use of meta-analysis. And Steve Goldswig, who's a colleague of mine at Marquette, he only is going to do qualitative content analysis. He's going to do also rhetorical criticism, narrative analysis, that style, because he looks at the text of particular Lyndon B. Johnson's speeches and delves into them very deeply. So the questions he has in his mind are only going to be answered through those types of styles of methods. Now, the first thing we got to talk about as we kind of work our way to figuring out how to write a research question is, what's a variable? Because when you write research questions, you're going to, for me, your first task coming up is to come up with a question that has two variables in it. And a variable is something that has characteristics. Now, there aren't just a handful of variables in the world. There are an infinite number of variables. And we're going to start walking our way through this next. So you might be saying, for example, you want to study violence and you want to take a look at violent behavior and what might lead to violent behavior. What might come first in time? Well, there's an infinite number of possibilities. So we could talk about gender, we could talk about age, we could talk about types of violent materials viewed, we could talk about family background as far as the makeup of the family, meaning a traditional nuclear family or some variation. We could talk about history of violence within the family leading to violent behavior. It's an infinite number of possibilities. So as researchers, that's why we turn to the literature. What have others found in order to try to inform us for our own research? Now, social media is a big one these days as far as a hot area of research. And what does social media use relate to? What do we mean by social media use? First of all, what platform are you using? How many times a day do you access it? How many hours per day? How many times do you share content? How many times do you post content? How many times do you comment upon other people's posts? And so on and so on and so on. And what might that all relate to? I don't know, someone's level of perceived happiness, their level of self-esteem, their level of self-worth, their perceived popularity, who knows? There are so many possibilities. That's what I mean by it being infinite, which is why we never finish. We never finish a field of research because there's always another possibility of things to study. So we try, though, because there's infinite number, we try after we take a look at the literature is to narrow it to variables that you are most interested in studying. And that's what we're going to try to do now as we're going through trying to create a research question. So we kind of look for for us, two variables to begin with, and which comes first. That's what I mean by determining the order. Which variable comes before the other in our question that we're going to write? Here's another part where I'd really like you to pause, and if you could, write a statement that will tell something about a pen. And I really would like you to not just move forward, pause right now, write a statement about a pen, and we'll come back. And as you're thinking about that, and hopefully have written some statements, the trick is not to use variables. Remember, variables are characteristics of something. And the answer is, all you can say about a pen that doesn't have anything to do with characteristics of the pen is that the pen exists, period. Anything else you may have come up with, like color of the ink, what is the barrel of the pen made of, what is the color of the pen itself, what's the weight of the pen, what's the quality of the ink, etc., etc. Everything you've probably came up with are not a statement of the pen, because everything you come up with uses variables. And here's the first lesson. I'm sure you can agree with what I just said. And when I'm going to ask you to make questions, research questions using two variables, oftentimes when you first start out, you're going to say a thing instead of something that we could call a variable. So if you write a research question that doesn't actually have variables, we can't study it. Variables have to be able to exist in multiple states, meaning a variable is something that, like let's say we say, what time of day what time of day a radio program airs. What time of day? So that could be, we'll say early or morning, midday, evening. Those are multiple states. How many times one accesses a given social media platform? That exists in multiple states, from 0 times to whatever the top number might be with the population. Both examples are variables. If there is no variation, that's called a constant. So if you tell me social media is my variable, there is no variation. What about it? Is it the type of platform? Is it the number of friends one has or connections on a given social media platform? What is it? That's the variable. Just saying social media is a constant. So again, here I'd like you to take a moment and test yourself and think, what are variables of a few different ideas? What are variables of a TV show? What are variables of a health campaign? And what are variables of a quote-unquote shithole, which is a nod to Donald Trump calling some places outside of the United States that bad word, shithole. So if you take a moment, please do that now and then come back to me. So assuming you did that, variables of a television show. Well, similar to a radio show, it could be time of day that the show airs. It could be genre of the show. It could be length of the show, popularity of the show, the um, recognition factor for the stars of a given show, how many years the show has been on, who produces the show and or directs the show and or writes the show, how many main characters are there, and so on and so on. Infinite number of things that can relate to studying a television show, a health campaign. What's the illness that it and or preventive medicine and or preventive behavior, or what is it they're trying to get at with this? Is it an attitude change versus a behavior change? When was the campaign aired? Through what media channels or channel? How long was the campaign? What type of spokespeople were used? Etc., etc., etc. I will skip the last one. That was just for amusement purposes. So what's my recommendation right now? That you get your head cleared and in the game to start creating research questions. Each question is going to be written just like this, where you say, what is the relationship between an IV, which means independent variable, and DV, which is a dependent variable. Each question is going to start out exactly the same. What is the relationship between? So just copy and paste it, and then you're going to fill in two variables. So independent means it comes first. So if you want to think chronologically, comes first in time and is manipulated. Means there has to be something about that. So you can't say social media. That's not a variable. You can't say what's the relationship between male adolescence, because that's not manipulated. You could say what's the relationship between gender of an adolescent, because that's manipulated, male, female. Age of a student, that can be manipulated. Type of video game one plays can be manipulated. Violent, non-violent, for example. Dependent variable in your question, what's the relationship between an independent variable and a dependent variable? That comes last. It's something that's measured. Think here attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. Those are in our communication field the typical dependent variables. Something then leads to the independent variable that comes first, leads to some kind of change, usually in attitudes, beliefs, and or behaviors of some population you're interested in studying. I'm not asking you to say what you think's going to happen. All we're doing is asking a question. Our first task, and it's a difficult one, is writing the research questions. And then we have to think about the values of variables. So if gender is the variable, the values are typically male and female. And I know we've got more categories these days, and that's fine. It just makes it messy for researchers. And what I mean by that is that most of your respondents are going to be male or female. And then if you put in all the other possible categories, like transgender, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, and so on, you may have people fall into those categories, but they won't be in large numbers. And as researchers, we really hate that. And we'll talk more about what to do with all of that later. So for now, we're just going to keep life simple. In fact, when the last time I filled out an immigration form, traveling abroad, they only had 2 categories on that form. They're not so progressive, I guess, in some places. This was Mexico, like the USA. So if class rank is the variable, the values of that variable are freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. If TV genre, type of genre, is the variable, its values could be sitcom, drama, game show, reality, etc., however many we think are important. If the amount of time spent with social media is the variable, the value of it could be number of hours per day, per week. It depends. What is it we're trying to get at? But again, that's the value of it, what you're really asking when you gather the data. What I don't want you to do is give the values when you write the research questions. So if you're going to ask what is the relationship between one's gender and something else, that's still giving me the variable. What you don't want to do is say, what's a relationship between a female college student and, because you've already now given me the value. If it was gender of a college student is the variable, its values are male and female college students. This will take some practice, so don't panic. And here's the assignment, which I'd like you to upload to Canvas. Simply type your name. You're going to put what's your topic. So maybe you're interested in radio programming, or you're interested in health campaigns, whatever it might be. Give me a topic, and then you're going to write 5 pairs of research questions. So pair number 1, RQ1, RQ2, colon after each. Write in what is the relationship between 2 variables. Now the part I have bolded here is kind of the kicker. You're going to have pairs of questions. The dependent variable in your first question of that pair moves from the dependent variable to the independent variable for your second question in that pair. So think about this. If your question is, your first question, what is the relationship between the class rank of a college student and their likelihood of joining a scholastic type of organization on campus? That's your first question. Your second question moves that likelihood of joining an organization, academic type, on campus, That now moves to the IV in your second question. Therefore, what is the relationship between a college student's likelihood of joining an academic organization during their college career and what comes next? Perhaps we could say something about their level of satisfaction with their college experience. That could be the new dependent variable. Now also keep in mind, all these questions are going to be about the same topic. So if it's about joining organizations, being involved on campus through organizations, maybe that's your overall topic area for all the questions. 5 pairs, you share a variable between each pair. You want these questions to be communication focused and make sure you have a common topic. This is all easier said than done. You will get multiple chances to do this because it's difficult to get this nailed down in one attempt. So I'm going to help you as often and many times as I can for you to understand this, because this is the very beginning of the scientific method and what we're really doing in our research methods class. So good luck.